Hello, everyone. This is I Am Pam. It is Tuesday, August 19th, and it's about 7:15 p.m. in the evening. Um, I am sitting out here in our front yard. Here's kind of a glimpse. Please excuse the poor yard. It's very dry, very arid here. We live in eastern Washington and it gets very dry. Our sprinkler system went down a few summers ago, and my husband has been trying to figure it out to get it back up and running so that we can time our waterings. We're on well, so to take a sprinkler and drag it around everywhere is not really ideal because you tend to forget how long it's going. And because we're on well water in the summer, it can really basically dry up, and we don't want to do that. So having it on a sprinkler system makes it a lot easier, and it has it timed, but he's tried everything to figure it out and he hasn't gotten it done yet. So we've done very little watering, as you can tell. It's kind of sad. Our yard is all burned up. So anyway, I came out here to sit, and there's my Maggie. She's out there with the trees. We planted 8 trees this year, some maples, and I'm going to enjoy watching them grow, and we'll be planting more trees every year. We've lived out here for 22 plus years. We're simpletons, so we don't do a lot of yard decorating or anything. We're pretty simple. We just love living out in the natural wild, and it's pretty good. So today was an interesting day. I've been thinking about how to approach my stories, whether I take it in chronological order by, from birth on up, or if I will skip around and, do stories, bits and pieces here and there. And after a day we had with my family today, I decided I am just going to go shoot off the hip and start with one of the major events of my life. I have a cousin. He's 39 years old. He is extremely addicted to meth. He is also a paranoid schizophrenic. He has a 10-year-old going on 11-year-old son who does not have his mother because his mother had drug addiction issues. Now, he's a cousin on my mom's side. Everybody in the family has tried to help him along, and when a drug addict wants to be a drug addict and doesn't want help, and now he's so far off paranoid and everything, nobody can really help him. So my aunt his mother had to get a protection order against him because he was abusing her, threatening people's lives, and just being all sorts of paranoid, and it was just becoming a very dangerous situation. And he still lives at home. She is somewhat codependent on him in ways, and it's hard for her to do the tough love thing. And it's apparent after all these years that it's come to this. But she finally did get a protection order on him. It was served late yesterday, and the police had to allow his son to go with him, even though they don't have really, at the time, they know he's mentally ill and sick, but they had no justification, as you call it, to not allow his son to go with him. So this last night we spent worrying about him. He's living in his car down in downtown where I live, close to where I live, doing drugs in front of him, tweaking all night. And this little boy had to live through all that all night, terrified. When his father finally fell asleep in the car, he was scared because he was alone, and there's a lot of strange people that run around in the downtown area. So he ran away and went back home to be with his grandmother, and that is where he lives. My aunt is his grandmother, and that is where his home has been for the last several years. And so finally, the police got involved again today, and they basically told him, and then CPS, they called CPS, and basically told him that he could not have his son living out of a car in the streets, being as young and vulnerable as he is. And basically, my cousin had to, he was going to give over temporary guardianship to my daughter. But it turned out they got Child Protective Services involved, and basically he cannot have guardianship of his son until he's in a homeless shelter or a shelter of some kind where he will be, where he will remain until he gets the help that he needs. So it was really basically sad event today, but my second cousin, the 10, 11-year-old boy is safe, and he's allowed to stay with his grandmother now, and until his father figures things out. Well, that brought about the whole events of today, and it's kind of been building up over a period of time, basically brings me to a point in my life regarding my mother. I lived like that myself. So I'm living through this little boy who's 10, 11 years old, and realizing where I've been during my lifetime, being in the same exact shoes he's in. And it's a scary, scary place. And so I tried to convince my cousin, his father, that put yourself in, I'm putting myself in this little boy's shoes. I know exactly what he's going through. My mother took choices. She knew she was unable to care for me, so she basically allowed family to step in. And I was asking him to do the same thing, because his mental health condition, along with the meth, is going to terrifies him. And I know exactly what that's like. When my mother had me, she was 18 years old. She was very young, just barely out of high school. And she was married to my father. And at first, everything seemed great. I was born. Everything seemed to be going along okay. I believe she was having some postpartum issues at that time. And there was some difficulties there. But like most moms, when they have their firstborn child, they do go through the postpartum. And every woman handles that differently. Well, by the time she got pregnant with my brother, things started to change with her mood, with her personality. Things were altering. And it was somewhat scary to my dad, because he didn't understand what was going on either, and he was trying to find answers. So when my brother was born, I was 2.5 years old. And when he was born, the family really had to step in, because my mom wasn't handling it very well. And so they all stepped in again, equated it to postpartum depression. Things kind of went on for a couple of years like that, until my mom started changing. And nobody knew what was wrong with her. My dad went round and round with the doctors, and they didn't know what was wrong with her. They were trying her on all these different psychotropic medications and all this stuff. So it was a huge roller coaster ride for us kids. And we ended up at my grandparents, my mom's parents. We ended up with them on numerous occasions. And we actually lived with them for weeks and months at a time, because my mother would have some kind of psychotic episode, and she would end up being sent to the hospital, and she'd be there for months. And after a few months, we were with my grandparents and my aunts and uncles, and my aunt, who is this young man I was talking about earlier, is his mother. And she took me and my brother in a lot growing up, and fed us, and we just really spent time with her. And she and her family were our solace when things got tough at home. And I'm sorry, I just jumped ahead a little bit, but it was nice to have family. And family was very comforting. And so it barely traumatized us at all when we were little, but I do remember some of the events that took place, and they're kind of scarred in my memory. And I don't want to say scarred because I am by no means at all impacted by all of this. It happened as a childhood. I've learned to forgive and understand, and I know that I have a common, I don't know if my guardian angels or my spirit guides and my God have helped me through this my entire life. We come to the realization years later, before I was 8 or 9 years old, we had a neighbor that was our watchkeeper, and she always watched out for us and took us in and fed us and stuff. When my mom wasn't well, she would often lock us out of the house. I came home from school, I was in first grade, and my brother was in a diaper or his underwear, locked out of the house, and he'd been out there for hours. And I had to scream and yell to get her to open the door and let us in. She hid in her bedroom for days and days and days at a time in the dark room. So this neighbor would often watch over us. She must not have been home that day, because she would have taken my brother in. He was very young. He was 3, maybe. And so she would have never left him out there for hours, but he was. And there were events like that a lot. And I would come home from school and find her screaming and yelling in the kitchen, literally tearing her hair out of her head. I mean, literally. And she kept saying, "Die, die, die." And I remember this so vividly. And a neighbor heard the commotion and called the police, and they came with fire trucks and ambulances. And at the age of 6 or 7, you don't understand what's going on. So they took her away. They had to tie her down and keep her restrained, and they took her. And so we ended up across the street with our neighbors and loved them dearly. They were great, great people. They kept us safe. And so thank you, Lord, for that. It was then that she was gone for months. And she finally, I don't know how long it was months. They finally came out with now this was in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. So I'm dating myself, but they came out with a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. And as a child, you just don't understand what that diagnosis means. But they tried her on, again, all kinds of different medications, and it just seemed to make it worse. One night, we were having dinner, and I thought my mom was doing great. We had the, what do they call that? Fondue. So there was a pot of hot oil fondue pot in the middle of the table. And we were fonduing up meat and cheese in this fondue pot. And we absolutely enjoyed it. And my brother and I decided we needed to go outside and play. And it was early evening. It was during the summer. We go outside. And we're playing. And all of a sudden, police and ambulances show up at our house. And we're like just standing there dumbfounded, like, what's going on? And the neighbors grabbed us and wouldn't let us go back to the house. Well, it turned out my mom went completely crazy on my dad and threw the fondue pot all over him in his lap. And the neighbor had to rush over there and strip his clothes and get wet towels and wash him down, wet him down with cold water and ice, whatever he could. And my dad ended up in the hospital with some skin grafts and really major burns on his arms and his legs. And he was probably in the hospital for a couple of weeks before he came home. But it wasn't too long after that he simply had to make a decision to divorce my mother. Now, how do you explain the divorce to your children? I was only like 8 or 9 years old at the time. All I knew was my mom was packing up and leaving. And I didn't understand it. To this day, I now realize she was trying to kill my dad, but she was also psychotic and didn't have, much control over her psychosis. So, she always stopped taking her medication. She would get on one med. She seemed to be doing okay for a while, and then she would stop, and then the psychosis would kick in again, and it was always worse the next time around. The one thing I have to say, though, guys, just so you know, I love my mom dearly. I grew up with her after that as an absent mother, but she was always there. Does that make any sense? She didn't have custody of us. She didn't raise us, but she fought for visitations to see us. She fought stronger to get through her mental health and to stay well. But it was a huge struggle. Now, if you've learned anything about schizophrenia, there's a scale that I call it a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being semi-mild, just being a mild form of it that's treatable and would go completely unnoticed by people if you're going through the right counseling and the right medication and all that. People wouldn't know you have schizophrenia. And then there's the scale of 10, where it's the worst form of schizophrenia. The delusions, the psychosis, the seeing things, talking to people, just being outright psychotic. And I put my mom on a scale of 11. That's how bad her sickness was. So she had a challenge. She had a battle on her hands. And, I grew up wishing that I could fix her. My brother wished he could fix her. But as a child, and you're processing all this, there was no one that could fix her. It was a burden that she had to bear, and she had to fight to recover. And she battled this illness all of her entire life until she passed away at 73. But I have to tell you, she stabilized over a course of many years. And I probably think the last 10 years of her life, she was probably the most stable she had ever been in her entire life. We have some great memories from those years, and we had some great times. And I spent a lot of time with my mom. Even though she was as sick as she was, she spent several years in a mental institution and then in a group home after that. And she was court ordered to take her medications. That's how really bad it got for her. I know that one time she disappeared on us, and it wasn't unusual for her to disappear. If she disappeared on us and none of the family saw her for days or weeks, we figured, she'll show up, she'll be okay. Someone is out there looking for her or watching out for her. But this one time she disappeared. She was gone for months, and she had me. I was 18 at the time. I had just turned 18 that year, and my grandmother, her mother, spent hours calling around to try to find her friends, the Al-Anon club where she used to hang out all the time. One of her delusions was she was an alcoholic. But this woman never touched a drop of alcohol in her life. But she really believed through her delusions and through people that she hung out with, that she got in cahoots with, that she was an alcoholic. So that was her reality. That wasn't ours, but that was hers. So we would go around to the clubs that she would hang out at. So she was claiming, it was her support system to stay sober, quote unquote. We went all around with her to her friends and, trying to find her, and couldn't find her. And there was this one person that she was living with. He hadn't seen her for weeks. So there was some time in there that I lost because I had to go back to school, and I was living with my father. And when I got back with my grandmother, she told me that they found her. And she was out at this mental hospital out west of town where I live and where I grew up. And she had been out there for months. And it turned out when she got a hold of all the right people, knowing where she was, turned out that she had been picked up by the police in the middle of the night. It's 2:00 in the morning, and she was very psychotic and out of her mind. And when she gets psychotic, she would be very violent. She would kick and bite and scratch, and she was very violent. So when the police picked her up, she was very violent. And they detained her and took her into the city jail because I guess a cab driver claimed that she stole a pin or something, but that was his gatekeeper's responsibility to let the police know that there was this psychotic woman running around out in the middle of downtown and that she needed help. And so they did detain her and took her into jail on being booked on stealing a pin from the cab driver. And they found she had not been on her medications for several weeks, extremely psychotic, wouldn't tell her who her family was. She said she was homeless, she didn't have family. And that's odd because us kids were the most important people in her life, and she didn't have kids when she went into this state. She hadn't bathed. She wouldn't use soap. She hadn't bathed for weeks. And that was another one of her delusions, is that a bar of soap would wrinkle her skin and turn her into a prune, so she would never use soap when she did shower. And so they couldn't handle her not having had a shower in jail with other inmates, so they tried to get her to take a shower. And when they tried to get her to take this shower, a matron or a police officer woman was fighting her, or she was fighting the police officer, and she bit the police officer, actually taking a chunk of flesh out of this police officer's shoulder. My mom was appalled that she did that later in years, and she couldn't believe that she did that. I wouldn't do that. I would never do that, anything like that. Well, that's because she was so psychotic and she was so sick that she wouldn't remember, and she wasn't who she normally would be if she were on her medication. So they basically charged her with assault, and the judge sentenced her to 5 years, 2 years being served in the mental institution, and she was in a lockup ward with other criminals. I kid you not. I was really frustrated with that. And then after 2 years, she had to be in a group home under supervision for 3 years, and court supervision and court-ordered medications. And it wasn't until after 5 years she was finally able to go out and be on her own. So, and she wasn't on her own. She had another partner. That's another story. I'll tell you about her partner later. It's actually a great story. But she was stable from then forward. She was doing really good. She had her ups and downs. She had her fallbacks, but she never went back to not being on her medication anymore. She never went back to being full-blown psychotic like she was. It was actually a blessing in disguise. And I will stand here and, as God is my witness, tell you that's what saved her life. That huge downfall, that whole moment in time, saved her life. I know she was on the streets. Before that, she was on the streets. She was hanging out at all kinds of different bars. She was doing all kinds of different things. And she was getting in with people that easily could have taken her life, or she could have disappeared and we would have never found her. She was in with those kinds of people. It was very scary. So when she did get caught downtown, I want to say the city, but I'm not going to. I'm in Eastern Washington, so you can only guess. And it's a big city. So anyway, she basically, that whole incident, her ending up in jail, her assaulting the police officer, her going out, being sentenced to 5 years of jail time, basically, but she wasn't in jail. She was at a mental health institute for 2 of those years, and then the rest of it, she was in a group home facility being monitored by a probation officer. I'm telling you, that saved her life. And I told her that on many occasions, that I was happy that she got the help she needed and the lessons that she learned as a schizophrenic to stay on her medications. It's one of the, I've done a lot of research with schizophrenia through the years because my mother had it and I lived it firsthand. I know a lot about it. And what causes it, we don't know, but we think it was genetics. We think or suspect a father that was that had it, her biological father. But we haven't, because a few other people in that side of the line of the family have had various diagnoses of schizophrenia. And we believe my cousin, the one that I was talking about earlier, he has schizophrenia. But he exacerbates it by, I can't even say that word, by taking meth and being a huge meth addict. Doesn't make it better. He's very violent himself. Carries a machete around when he gets paranoid. He could take someone's head off very easily. He does some very scary things. So he needs to be where he can get the help he needs. So, but long story short with all this right now is that mental health is very, very important. That you take care of yourself. You watch for these things. Know what's in your family history. Seek the help. It's out there. Find a good counselor. You can find one. My daughter, she has schizophrenia. But on a scale, hers is a 1. And she controls it with medication, has a very good counselor. She's on disability and she's on Medicare, which is scary. I don't know how. That's a whole nother story. But she found a good counselor after a couple tries. And she goes through her life every day without anybody knowing, that doesn't know her in the family. Nobody would know that she has schizophrenia because she takes care of it. And she knows what her boundaries are when she gets stressed or when she gets tired. She knows that she can't stop taking her medication or she has a setback, which happened last year because she thought, for some reason, I don't think I need this. I forgot to take it the last couple of nights. I don't think I need it anymore. I feel just fine. And then guess what? Here it comes. And it takes 3 or 4 times as long to get back on that medication, to get back up to your proper mental health. Rather than just having stopped taking the medication. So she learned a big lesson and she knows she will never do that again. And I am so thankful for that. And I'm very proud of her because it was a scary time when we found out she was schizophrenia. And my own worst fear, thinking my children could end up with that because my mom had it. It skipped me and possibly my brother. And we'll talk about that. I'm not so sure he escaped completely. But my daughter, goodness sakes. I didn't. Was the last thing I would ever want, was to find out she had schizophrenia, but it was passed down, and it was a reality that we have to learn to live with. And again, she's doing so functionally. She's high functioning. She has full custody of her daughter. She takes care of her daughter and does everything that she needs to do for her life. And she's a wonderful mother, and she's a wonderful person. And, my mom was too. My mom was a beautiful soul. She was very intuitive and very wise. And I would think of her as being a wise soul. She was very wise, and she would always tell me things that would come to fruition years later. And I always went to her for advice. I know I didn't grow up with her, but she did come and grab us on visitations every now and then growing up. And there was very, very scary times. There were times I didn't want to stay with my mom. I have to be honest. There were times where we would rather just go home, or we would want to go stay with my aunt. And, Mom, can we go stay with my aunt this weekend? Can we go stay with her? Because we were afraid to be home with her alone. It was very, very scary at times. She only had us for a day or two here and there, but I can really equate to how our little man, let's call him, my cousin's son, I can really relate to what he's going through, because he fears his father so much. And it's very sad. And he wants to stay either with my daughter, or he wants to stay with his grandmother. There's other family members he would stay with too, because everybody has taken such good care of him and loved him, and still love him, of course, and have taken care of him through this whole thing. So there's nothing like family that supports each other. And that's another strong point, is family. When you have someone in your family that's struggling, support them. Learn about what they're going through. Because I know my cousin is going through a very tough time right now, and I love him, but he needs to choose to get help. He needs to choose to get clean and sober, and choose to take care of his mental health and stay on it. If he doesn't, he will lose his son. So, anyway, that's where I am tonight. I know I'm just kind of shooting out the hip, but this was very important, near and dear to my heart today, because this all came down today.